Welcome back to the show, Business Mastery for Startups, Scale-Ups, and Early Stage Businesses with your host, Jerry Gadori. That's me. And this week, we have Chris Brown, noted CISO, executive consultant, and now book author, here to talk to us about cybersecurity and how it impacts small business. Chris, could you do a better job than I did of introing yourself, please?
Sure. Thank you, Jerry. I am Chris Brown. As Jerry said, I am an executive coach, a former CISO, longtime management consultant, and I recently published my book, CISO Impact: How Cybersecurity Executives Can Take the Lead and Nudge the World. I work with cybersecurity leaders who want to elevate their authority, their presence, how they show up in a room, lead with purpose, and hopefully along the way have a little less stress. It's a tough role.
It certainly is.
And become members of the CEO's team. And so that's what I work on.
Gosh, we could talk about a ton of things there. First of all, Chris is too humble to mention that even though his book was just released, it already hit #1, which is an incredible achievement in a world where many first-time authors don't even sell 100 copies of their book. So congratulations, my friend.
Thank you, Jerry.
I want to say this. So at risk of derailing my own show, even as we're just starting, CISO is such a hard one. I remember back late 90s-ish when the CIO, CTO was just trying to earn their seat at the big boys table or big girls table, as back then, unfortunately, pretty exclusively the big boys table. Now, gladly saying that it's also the big girls table. But CISOs are there now. And I think there's a lot of fundamental changes that have to occur for folks to really understand why that's important. I don't think that companies look at security really the right way. And you might say, gosh, why are you guys talking about a role like this, which exists in zero small businesses and startups?
Sure.
And the reason is because, like many things that your company will evolve and grow into, this is one of the things that you want to start thinking about now. Is your third hire in your e-commerce business going to be a CISO? It is not. But you're probably at a place where you should already be involved at the least with an MSSP that's providing baseline security for you. So let's talk about that. Chris,
Sure.
if I'm Jerry, the $2 million e-com brand or three location chain of hotels or 10 store convenience store chain, where do I start thinking about cybersecurity and how do I start tackling that?
It's a good question. And the practicalities will depend, and we'll get into that in a minute.
For sure.
But the way I think about it is that there's no point at which you're not thinking about it. The question is, are you thinking about it in the right amount and in the right places? And so when you hire your third developer, maybe that's the time to really think about, okay, what security skills or background do I want to put in here? Not as a requirement, but at least to start surfacing the potential of including people that are a little steeped in security into the everyday. And in fact, one of the points I make in the book, and this is something I tell boards of large companies and small companies, especially when they ask for benchmarking, what's the right number of cybersecurity people? And it's the big company analogy of when do I start thinking about it? For the large companies that are thinking about how big of a department, I say 0. And I say that a little bit to be snarky, but I also say that to get out of this trap of thinking you have to hire somebody. And large cybersecurity departments exist to counterbalance what's not being done elsewhere in the company. That's the real answer to that equation, is if more people are doing more things well in regards to managing risk, protecting data, protecting operations, and treating that as part of their job, you can wait a lot longer to hire a cybersecurity person or grow the team. And so how do you integrate that? How do you think about that? You do that in your hiring process. You do that by reframing goals. So what does it mean to have a great app? What does it mean to have a really well-run small hotel chain? Well, it includes security. Then the question becomes, okay, who's responsible for it? And one of the things you can do early on is think about who has the most at stake if something goes wrong. Is it the operations lead? Is it the lead of finance? Is it a customer service leader, because that's where the brunt of it's going to come from? If that's where the implication is, give them 5% of their time to just think about cybersecurity. That's where you start. That's how you start thinking about it. Where is it important, and how do we bake it in?
That makes sense. And would it also make sense, or would it be the role of the person you just described to ask yourself, from my department, from my view of the world, where am I most likely to experience some type of an attack? Is that a part of the equation as well? Or is that someone else making those choices?
So it is always the choice of the business. One of the misconceptions about cybersecurity is that it's so esoteric. It's so complicated that you as a business person can't possibly be involved or lead it. And that's fundamentally wrong. That's one of the challenges
Couldn't agree
in the
more.
field right now. And so, yeah, it's, and us as cybersecurity professionals, we have not historically done a good job of making that better. In fact, we tend to make it worse, a little bit bravado, a little bit of dropping big words and complicated technology. So we don't help ourselves in that manner, but it doesn't have to be as intimidating as it seems. So how do we do that? Well, we have a human resources department, but they don't manage people. They help you manage people. And
Right. They
so if you
manage
think of that,
processes.
yeah, so if you think about it that way, you don't delegate management of your team to HR. So don't delegate management of cybersecurity to a technology function. There is some infrastructure pieces to cybersecurity, but a surprising amount of it is just how you behave day to day. And so, how do you do that? How do you, as maybe a middle manager, you just hired your third person in your team. Like, what does cybersecurity mean in your area, and what's your responsibility for it? Not waiting for somebody else to take over and tell you from a far off, far flung department um, what to do.
So, from a company structure perspective, then, taking this fictional small business that we're describing for our example, as you continue to exceed and grow, and you ultimately do bring in a dedicated cybersecurity leader and then leaders, whatever, are you then suggesting that those folks matrix up to that person for that 5% of their time that deals with cybersecurity? Is that the organization that you're envisioning, or does the structure change as it grows?
I don't think the structure changes. There are good places and bad places to put a cybersecurity function or leader anywhere in a company. That's highly dependent. Some common places are within IT that has its problems. If you happen to have a risk function, which is very industry specific, maybe in a risk function, um, maybe under operations, what makes sense to you? Where is most of the weight? Where does most of the work have to happen? As far as the matrix thing, not necessarily. We don't matrix quality. We don't matrix customer service in that way. So it's everybody's job. You don't have to have reporting lines to do it. What I Going back to sort of when do you make that first hire, or when do you determine you need somebody dedicated to do it? It's when you reach that tipping point of it's costing the business more to think every day deeply about cybersecurity in all these places than it would be to have somebody do the deeper thinking and then act as a guide to the business leaders. That's the tipping point. Is when are we becoming less efficient at cybersecurity, or really any function that is more about thinking than it is about deep technology? When does that shift? Okay, well, I'm spending too much time figuring out what I need to do. I think it's time to hire somebody.
That makes sense. And related, perhaps related tangent. I do a fair amount of work with managed security providers and with dedicated managed
Mm.
security providers. Um, do you utilize them? Do you recommend their usage, or with small businesses? Uh, how do you recommend they play in that sandbox? Quick note: one of the things that I talk to folks about as they're growing their company is that what makes sense for you in the beginning might not necessarily make sense later
Sure.
on. So some things are a matter of I use this outside specialist until I'm big enough to in-house that. With others, I use that outside specialist. It's never a part of my core piece. So I either work with them and they grow with me, or I go to successively larger organizations.
Sure.
So it can depend on, marketing, staffing, any type of consulting kind of falls in that bucket.
Yeah. So managed security services are almost always in the mix in some way. Whether it's a vendor that ends up being your primary platform, uh, and your expectations of them in regards to security, they are in part managing security for you, all the way to outsourcing the entire cybersecurity function, which you can do with virtual CISOs, managed security services, and other things that will layer in. What you can't do is outsource accountability for it
Yes.
or paying attention
Yes.
to it. So the structure, yeah, go ahead. Look, if there's no competitive advantage for you to do cybersecurity in-house, then there's no competitive advantage to it. Figure out how to manage it well outside. Again, it's that tipping point. Where am I spending more time? Am I spending more time managing a managed security service provider, or would I be spending more time doing it in-house? And what are the value trade-offs, benefit trade-offs? Um, Big companies, small companies, they outsource something because there's just too much to do. One of the biggest things to outsource, and Jerry, you probably know this just as well as I do, is the day-to-day, the operations of monitoring things. Is something going wrong? Is somebody trying to attack my systems? Is there an interface that's vulnerable somewhere? Doing those high effort, ongoing 24/7 things are very hard to do in-house and almost impossible to do for small to medium businesses. Even large organizations, depending on how they're set up, will outsource some component of that, depending. So that's one of the first things to go out. But you can outsource code review. You can outsource the management function through virtual CISOs. You can take those pieces that don't make sense for you to do in house, absolutely. But you can't just say, oh, somebody else is taking care of it, because they don't know your business. They don't understand what's important. They don't know what's changing in the market. They don't know why you might have just become a target because, well, you were in the news, whether it was local news or something bigger. Like, they don't know those things. You have the pulse of that. And so as a business owner or a business leader, you still have to pay attention to where you need to pay attention.
One of the cornerstones of Marine Corps leadership that they taught us early on is that you can delegate everything except responsibility. So, using an outside service that's an expert in the area that you either choose not to or aren't ready to in-house is a great choice for many organizations, but you hit it on the head. It's still your responsibility and your commitment to your customers that you're taking care of this. Another thing that I think in cybersecurity specifically that gets lost in the sauce is shared responsibility. And you touched on it a little bit. That outside SOC can't know everything about your company. It's not possible. It's outside the scope of their role. So if
Right.
you're not sharing in that, keeping them abreast of changes, which surprisingly gets forgotten, letting them know about things, knowing what they don't do so you know to do it, then you're really setting yourself up to fail, I think.
Yeah, those handoffs, whether it's internal to a company between the security function or the CISO and the rest of the company, or between anybody internal and external, those handoffs are where a lot of misunderstandings and issues happen. I mean, we see this in terms of what's covered in the news.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of those boil down to poor handoffs or a misunderstanding of who picks up where whoever left
Yeah.
off.
But
Um,
Chris, I thought you were dealing with that.
no, absolutely, absolutely. That
Yeah.
is that is true, and that's part of the trap of thinking, oh, we have somebody with securities taken care of. And that's not true. And, it would be like, as car owners, which presumably many people are, uh, you drive, you have to put gas in the car. It's still your responsibility to change the oil and listen for knocks and realize that it's riding a little funny. There's this skill that we sort of pick up as we drive longer. Hey, something's a little off here. That will always be the car owner's responsibility. Now, are you going to rebuild your engine block? No, probably not. Not most of us. Will you change your oil? Perhaps, if you've got the right stuff and you know how to do it. And it's the same sort of decision-making process, but you can't let go of that paying attention part.
Yeah, you bring up another thing I think folks need to think of. And since we're using analogies, cybersecurity is like laundry and dishes. It's never done. So,
No,
so it's something that you always have to keep at least in the back corner of your mind and running. But listen, before I change topic, because there's something else in cybersecurity I want to talk about.
sure.
You've worked in this space for a long time. If you could give one piece of advice to any business owner or early stage leader as it pertains to your specialty in cybersecurity, what would that advice be, Chris?
I think it touches on what we talked about earlier. Pretend there is no such thing as a cybersecurity expert and act as if that's the case.
So for folks just who need more explanation of that, what does that mean?
So that means that there is there are many things that you can do that are non-technical, and waiting for the right person, waiting for the right bucket to put it into, that is the fatal mistake. So pretend that there's no expert out there that will take care of things, and recognize there are things that are in your control and within your understanding, and do those things.
Well, that makes a ton of sense. And again, keep responsibility for its completion, whether you outsource it to another group or party,
Yeah.
front of mind for yourself. So that's actually a really good transition to what I want to talk about. I've never loved the blanket term cybersecurity, and I'll explain why. If I say to my friend, or my friend says to me, "Hey Jerry, what do you do for a living?" and I say I work in cybersecurity, it's an unhelpful response. It's kind of like saying I work in finance or I work in tech. If I say I work in finance, that could be anything from I'm the CFO to I'm the bank teller. It could
Mm-hmm.
be it could mean that I work in digital currency. It could mean almost anything.
Sure.
And the reason why I don't love that with cybersecurity, I think it leads to the problem we kind of joked about earlier, that cybersecurity is one of those weird fields that's simultaneously and perpetually overstaffed and understaffed. Why? It would be more accurate to say we never have the right mix of people.
Yeah.
We tend to have either 7 billion people that just graduated a cybersecurity boot camp, or we have 7 trillion people at the top that have been directors of cybersecurity for a decade and want to be a CISO. So it's that middle that I think where we tend to struggle, that person that's got 3 to 5 years of hands-on experience. But cybersecurity can mean so many things. It can mean information security. It can mean cloud security. It can mean GRC stuff. There's such
Right.
a wild group of skills, and it really leads to the point you made earlier on, Chris, where what department does it fit in? I don't know. Kind of all of them. you know.
Yeah. So, adding to that, generic terms are really terrible. So,
Yes.
cybersecurity, okay, that's a quick, easy handle. But what are we really talking about when we say I'm in cybersecurity? As you said, there's a different set of roles, but maybe one more interesting way of talking about it, or a interesting way of talking about it, is, what is your purpose? I, I work with technologists to protect our customer data.
Mm-hmm.
I think about where all our risks are, and I help management see that big picture. And those are different ways of describing. Like in that second case, it's a GRC leader, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
somebody who works in risk governance, risk, and compliance. Put it in those terms. Describe what you do. Paint that picture, um, and that helps people understand better. It makes it a little less impenetrable. And how many people know what GRC is? More now than they used to, but still not everybody. But to say I help paint the picture of what risk looks like for us to management, everybody gets that. So that's part of what we need to do as cybersecurity people is de-jargon things. Just use English, be
100%.
descriptive, talk about purpose. And when you look for people, when you're looking to expand that team, and when you're looking to negotiate roles, do the same thing. Don't use these labels that mean different things to different people. A CISO is a prime example of a title where there are big arguments about what a CISO is. And the truth is, there's no one thing that is a CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer. There are many things, and it's whatever you need it to be. And it's whatever the person you're hiring wants it to be, but negotiated together.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Like, who cares you have to have so many staff. No. What do you need it to be? What is, does the person you're putting in the position understand? Have you used descriptive words? Get out of the jargon. Talk about the purpose, talk about the scope, talk about what's important to the company. And that's true of anybody in probably any position. But as you mentioned, the CEO role, or the CIO role 20, 30 years ago, it was kind of a catch-all term. Nobody knew what that was. We are in that same place, and we're going to have to go through the same steps of negotiating every position with clarity, because for quite a while, we're not going to know what CISO really means and agree on it.
You touched on two things that I want to talk about. The first is jargon. Ironically, the very first blog post I ever wrote, about 10 or so years ago, was the title was Jargon, the Great Separator. Mm-hmm. Jargon serves a purpose, and it's a legitimate one. It lets us know who's in our tribe and who isn't. If I talk to Chris and use a bunch of jargon and he gets it, then I know that he's in my tribe. He knows all my secret handshakes and all my code words.
Right.
But if he doesn't, then he doesn't. So that particular article was talking to salespeople and recruiters. If you're a salesperson, you use a bunch of jargon, especially early in process, you're literally separating yourself from the very person you're trying to connect to. Mm-hmm. If you are a candidate talking to a recruiter, or a recruiter talking to a candidate, or a candidate talking to a manager and in another company in a career space that we know doesn't have unified descriptions, and you're using jargon, you're potentially misaligning at a time when you need to align. So jargon is your enemy in this place.
It is true. And that's actually there's almost a half chapter devoted to that in the book, about understanding language and understanding, look, you come with a set as a cybersecurity professional, or an accounting professional, or whatever, whether it's accounting and talking about esoteric gap rules, which are esoteric to me, but every day to the accounting person, or me talking about a cybersecurity framework, which is every day for me and my clients, it's esoteric to everybody else. Look, use that. It's really good shorthand. When I say a particular type of firewall, let's say, to my cohort in cybersecurity, we know what we're talking about. We know all the implications, but nobody else does. Don't talk about those things. Describe it. And stop relying on jargon to position yourself for authority, to sound smart, to signal, because those end up undercutting you. And that is true of any profession. So, as somebody who's hiring, and as somebody who wants to be hired, who somebody wants to make that connection quick at a company, you're right. Those are absolutely ways to distance yourself, and not do the type of communicating and negotiating that you need to at the front end.
Yeah, so, and you hit on a second thing too that I really want to talk about as well, and that's titles and responsibilities. So Chris, his primary job is literally consulting with companies about how to implement cybersecurity projects and programs, and how leaders can grow in the space. So we couldn't ask for a better authority with this when he says that. Please listen. In an industry that hasn't universally defined titles, Be mindful of the title that you're using, and what it means to others, and describe as you introduce yourself. And I'll give you a dated but still relevant experience, or example rather. About 20 or so years ago, I worked with a very small medical imaging company. And this was back when MRIs were giant machines that fit on trailers. And a lot of local hospitals didn't have facilities for that. So they would literally lease them from this company. They would trailer, drive it over to that hospital. And that company, when you got an MRI, excuse me, a hospital rather, when you got an MRI, you physically left the building and went to one of these, for lack of a better word, trailer facilities, got your MRI, and then you left. Well, the company that managed that, intensely capital investments were there for sure. They were a pretty small company. And this is way back in the early days of my career. I used to work with their CTO to help them when they had big projects, because he had a tiny team. And by tiny, I mean it was him, a desktop support person, and a help desk person. So we worked together for a couple of years, got to be friends. And for personal reasons, he had to leave that company, moved to California. In those days, in the Stone Ages, I only worked that little geographic piece of Massachusetts. So figured we'll never talk again. Fast forward like 9 months, and he reaches out to me. He's like, "Hey, Jerry, really need your help. I'm not getting any traction. I'm not getting anywhere." I'm like, "I'm sorry to hear that, man. How can I help?" So he sends me his resume, and it's the company name and his title, CTO, and then led 2 people. And I said, "It's because you're not really a CTO." And he's like, "What are you talking about?" I said, you led 2 people, and any other company, at most, you're a systems administrator / team lead. And when people are looking at your title, if they're looking for a CTO, you don't have the experience they're looking for. If they're looking for a sysadmin team lead, which is the roles that you're putting yourself in for, they're seeing CTO. So I was like, you have misaligned yourself from the jump, and people are ignoring you because of it. He changed his title, the system administrator team lead, and was employed in less than a month.
Yeah.
So that's just how impactful that can be.
Yeah, absolutely. We have, there's higher turnover in cybersecurity because of titles. This is Chris Brown's personal opinion, that there's a lot of roles out there that have the CISO title. People get in it and then realize they're an IT manager. Yeah. And they don't have visibility to the CEO. They don't have the things that are typically associated with a CISO title. And I'm not saying they have to report high in the organization or structure, but the level of access and authority to other folks in the company is kind of linchpin for an effective CISO. And if you're just buried somewhere and which is fine, but you don't have access, you're actually blocked from access, people will leave because it is title inflation. And that goes both ways, right? On the resume, there could be somebody that calls themselves a CISO, and they're a one-person shop. They just worked for a company that wasn't particularly particular about who got the C in front of the information security officer. And so titles are tough right now. It will probably settle out at some point. Don't expect it to settle out soon. For everybody, look past the title. Look at what you really need. And if you are posting or if you are looking for a job, look at try and find some space in the middle. Don't be the extreme where you're calling yourself a CISO, but you've been in security for 5 years and you've never had anybody report to you.
Yeah, you're not helping yourself.
No. And companies likewise, don't call it a CISO if it's the 5th position and you really want them to run IT and desk side support and those other things too, right? It's just, you're not going to get the applicants you want.
And the key there is communication. So ensure that when you're talking, I don't want this to devolve into a conversation about interviews, but when you're talking to your interviewer, that needs to be a conversation, not an interrogation. And you need to ask the questions that are relevant to your success in that role. So in your example, I'm not a CISO, but in your example, do I have access to senior leadership? Under what circumstances do I get that access? How big is my team? What are our 5-year plans? The things that will give you the information you need to know if what they're calling CISO is what you need it to be for this job to make sense for you.
Absolutely. And communication, that is a key moment of communication, right? Big decisions hinge on it. Similarly, communication, and probably alluded to this several times, is so key. And I want to share a short story. So
Absolutely.
early in my career, I went from being a IT manager, security operations, like I led a team of 8 or 9. It eventually became 15 or something. But early in my career, and then I switched to consulting. And I'd done training and all sorts of stuff. But my first consulting training gig, I went out with this guy who really knew HIPAA. Like, this is pre-HIPAA time. He was like 4 years, 5 years ahead of everybody else. Bright guy, smart guy, really nice guy. And he did training first for this regional hospital. And I watched and I'm like, oh, okay, I know how to talk about security. I can do this. And this seems comfortable and familiar. So I stood up and I did training. It was terrible. I felt flat. Like, the audience wasn't engaged. There was nothing happening. And he pulled me aside after that first one. He said, you're not telling them why they should care. And you used the word customer. It's not customer. It's patient. And I'm like, oh, dang. Right. And then so I did it again. And 20 minutes in, at that sort of like same point it happened last time, I talked about screen protectors, because back in the day, monitors faced everywhere.
Oh, the
And
ones, yeah, I remember those when they first
yeah,
hit the
yeah.
market.
And
Yeah.
so you had to put the screen protectors on so people couldn't see patient data. And the nurses were pulling them off. And a woman in the middle of the room says, we're going to continue to pull them off because they interfere with our work. And I'm this chief nursing officer. Not good, right? So I get worried. At this point, I'm like scrambling. And about 10 minutes later, it hits me as I'm listening to them talk and I'm listening to what they talk about. They don't care about cybersecurity. They don't care about cybersecurity at all. They care about patient care. They care about how they do their jobs. They care about doing their jobs well. They care about people's health and well-being. So without really like having that epiphany and jumping right to it, I said, how long do you care about patient care? And the CNO, who had been polite, leans in and said, what do you mean? I'm like, do you care about patient wellness and care after they leave? And she said, absolutely. And I say, okay, so somebody's in the hospital, neighbors in the hospital, not visiting them. They see something on the screen. They go home and tell the neighbors, blab it. The woman's discharged from the hospital. She realizes people are talking about her. She gets embarrassed because it's an embarrassing procedure, shuts down, withdraws from the community, and has such a feeling of shame, she doesn't come in for follow-up care. The CNO says the screen protectors will stay on.
Beautiful.
That is the level at which we need to communicate. And that's how we have to connect to make cybersecurity work.
That's powerful. And I've got to say this, we're running long, so I want to wrap. So that's a great way to end. But I do want to say this. What Chris just illustrated is leadership and management through education, not mandate. The inverse of his story is one I've seen in cybersecurity too often, where a cybersecurity leader says, we're doing this because we're doing this, and that's the end of it. And those are never successful. First of all, no one wants to work in that environment. Nobody likes to be told. And second, when you're not dealing with people at a level so they understand what you're trying to accomplish, even if they want to, they're less likely to be effective in doing it. So that is a powerful story, Chris. Let me ask you this. And first of all, thank you very much for being on. Where can people connect with you? You've obviously got a ton to share. Where can they learn more about you and connect with you?
Sure. My website is a good place, which is newcyberexecutive.com. For the book itself, you can go to cisoimpact.com, and that will direct you to where you can learn more about the book and potentially pick it up. You can also email me at chris@newcyberexecutive.com as well.
That's awesome. And Chris, thanks for being on. Spoiler alert, when I stop, I'm going to ask you to come back. Clearly, you have a ton to share, because I'd love to spend a whole show just talking about cybersecurity compliance and how to make people a part of the solution instead of the solution you have to solve.
Absolutely. We'd love to do that.
Awesome. Thank you very much for being on, Chris.
Thanks, Jerry.